The night Claire Whitman handed her credit card to a stranger, she never imagined it would change her life. It started as a joke at a charity gala in Boston, where wealthy donors gathered to outbid each other for causes they would forget by morning. When Daniel Brooks approached the registration table and was quietly turned away for lacking the minimum donation, Claire watched with the amusement of someone who had never been denied anything. On impulse, she slid her platinum card across the table toward him. 24 hours, she said, loud enough for her friends to hear. Spend whatever you want. Daniel took the card without a word, without gratitude, without even meeting her eyes. He simply nodded once and walked out into the cold. Claire Whitman had grown up in a world where money was as invisible as air. Her father built a commercial real estate empire across New England, and by the time she turned 30, her trust fund generated more interest in a month than most families earned in a year. She never thought about prices, never checked balances, never experienced that particular anxiety that comes from watching numbers dwindle toward zero. Money, to Claire, was simply there, like gravity or sunlight, a force that required no attention because it never threatened to disappear. Her apartment, overlooking the Charles River, cost more monthly than a teacher's annual salary, but she rarely considered this. The gala that evening was for children's literacy, though she couldn't remember the specific organization. She attended because her social circle attended, because the photographs would appear in Boston Magazine, because refusing would require an explanation she didn't care to give. The $100 minimum donation was pocket change, hardly worth noticing. So when she saw the man at the registration table, heard the hushed exchange as he was informed of the requirement, watched him stand frozen with embarrassment before the gatekeeper. Something in her flickered. Not sympathy. Not quite cruelty either. Something more complicated. A desire to prove a point she couldn't quite articulate. A need to demonstrate the vast distance between her world and his. "Let me handle this," she'd said, approaching with champagne in hand. Her friends watched from nearby, already smiling at whatever entertainment was about to unfold. She remembered the way Daniel looked at her then, the brief assessment in his eyes before his expression went carefully blank. He was tall, perhaps 35, with the weathered hands of someone who worked outdoors. His suit was clearly borrowed, slightly too large in the shoulders. "Take it," she insisted when he hesitated. "Think of it as a social experiment, 24 hours to spend like the other half-lives." Her friends laughed. Someone made a comment about Pretty Woman in reverse. Claire felt the warm glow of being the center of attention, of performing generosity that cost her nothing emotionally, even if the monetary amount was theoretically unlimited. Daniel took the card. Now, 3 hours later, Claire recounted the story at an after-party in her living room. Her closest friends gathered on designer furniture, drinking wine that cost more per bottle than Daniel probably spent on groceries in a month. "He just took it?" Madison asked, incredulous. "Without saying anything?" "Not a word," Claire confirmed. "I honestly don't think he knew what to do. You should have seen his face." "He's probably at a casino right now," offered Trent, Madison's husband. "Or buying a ridiculous car he can't insure." "I'm monitoring the account," Claire admitted, pulling out her phone. "Nothing yet. Maybe he's too proud to actually use it. Or too smart," Madison suggested. "He knows you're watching. He'll wait until you're asleep." They laughed together, warm and comfortable in their assumptions about how poor people behaved when given access to wealth. Claire imagined a shopping spree at Best Buy, perhaps a hotel suite, certainly alcohol. She had witnessed enough charitable galas to develop a theory about poverty that it stemmed from poor choices rather than poor circumstances. People like Daniel, she believed, remained poor because they didn't know how to handle money properly. Given resources, they would squander them on immediate gratification. It was almost a kindness, she told herself, to prove this point. 23 miles away, Daniel Brooks climbed the stairs to his third-floor apartment in Dorchester. The building was old, the hallway smelled of mildew and cooking grease, and the fluorescent light on his landing had been flickering for 6 weeks without repair. He moved quietly, careful not to wake Mrs. Okonkwo next door, whose night shift started at 4 in the morning. His apartment was small, a living room that doubled as his bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom with unreliable hot water, and the only real bedroom, which belonged to his daughter. He crossed the worn carpet and eased her door open, watching Lily sleep in the glow of her nightlight. She was 8 years old, and she was everything. On the kitchen table sat the familiar pile of envelopes he could no longer bear to open. Electric bill, gas bill, a collection notice from the pediatric cardiology department at Boston Children's Hospital, another from a credit card he'd maxed out paying for Lily's first surgery 2 years ago. Rent 3 months overdue, with an eviction notice buried somewhere in the stack. Daniel sat down and placed Claire's credit card in front of him. In the dim light of his kitchen, surrounded by evidence of everything he owed, he stared at the small rectangle of platinum plastic. She thought he would spend it on himself. He knew that's what she expected, what would confirm every assumption she'd made when she looked at him. She wanted a story to tell at parties, proof that people like him couldn't be trusted with resources. She wanted to be right. Daniel picked up the first envelope from the pile. Boston Children's Hospital. $47,000 for the cardiac catheterization that discovered Lily's ventricular septal defect, the subsequent monitoring, the medications that kept her stable. $47,000 that grew larger with interest every month, that threatened to destroy what little credit he had left, that sometimes woke him at 3 in the morning with the specific terror of a father who cannot afford to keep his child alive. He thought about what Claire would see if she checked the account in the morning. The notification appeared on Claire's phone at 7:15, while she was still in bed with a mild champagne headache. She almost dismissed it without looking, assuming it was another marketing email from her bank. But something made her tap the alert, some curiosity about what the man from the gala had chosen to buy with his 24 hours of unlimited wealth. Boston Children's Hospital. $47,322. Claire sat up, suddenly very awake. She read the transaction again, certain she was misunderstanding something. People didn't spend their windfall on hospital bills. People bought things, experiences, objects they could show off or consume. This made no sense. She checked for other transactions. There were none. Just this single massive payment to a children's hospital, processed at 2:43 in the morning while she slept in her Riverside apartment, surrounded by friends who had joked about casinos and luxury cars. Her first instinct was fraud. Someone had stolen the card from Daniel and was running some kind of medical billing scam. But that didn't make sense either. The payment had cleared, legitimate and traceable, to an actual hospital for actual services rendered. She could see the account number, the patient billing department, the exact amount down to the penny. Claire opened her laptop and searched for information about what could possibly cost $47,000 at a children's hospital. The results made her stomach tighten. Cardiac surgery, cancer treatment, chronic illness management, the kinds of bills that arrived when something was seriously wrong with a child, when parents would pay anything to keep their sons and daughters alive. She thought about Daniel's face at the gala, the way he hadn't argued or pleaded, the borrowed suit, the weathered hands, the complete absence of reaction when she offered her card like it was a party trick. He had a sick child. He had a sick child and $47,000 in medical debt, and she had handed him her credit card as a joke. For the first time since the previous evening, Claire stopped smiling. Daniel woke to Lily's small hand on his shoulder. He had fallen asleep at the kitchen table again, his neck stiff, the pile of envelopes still spread before him. Morning light came weakly through the window, diffused by the grime no amount of cleaning could fully remove. "Daddy, you forgot to sleep in your bed," Lily observed with the matter-of-fact concern of a child who had learned to monitor her father's well-being. "I know, sweetheart. I was doing some work." She climbed onto his lap, careful as always not to exert herself too much. The doctors had explained that her heart condition required monitoring, that she shouldn't run or play too roughly, that stress could trigger complications. At 8 years old, she had internalized these limitations so thoroughly that she moved through the world like a small, cautious ghost. "Is it about the hospital letters?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. He had tried to shield her from the financial reality, but children noticed more than adults gave them credit for. She had seen him on the phone with collection agencies, had heard snippets of conversations about payment plans that fell through. "Not anymore," he said, and meant it. He made her breakfast with what remained in the refrigerator. Eggs and toast with the last of the butter. While she ate, he looked at the credit card, still sitting on the table. 24 hours. Claire had given him 24 hours, probably expecting him to spend it all in the first few hours on frivolous purchases. Instead, he had used 3 hours and addressed only the most critical debt. There was more. There was always more. The rent threatening eviction. The utility bills creeping toward shutoff. The credit card debt from when Sarah was still alive, when they had both worked and still barely managed to stay afloat. Now, as a single father with a daughter who required expensive medical care, the numbers had become impossible. But Daniel had learned something important during the hard years since Sarah's death. Every dollar had weight. Every purchase carried consequences. The discipline of poverty had taught him to see money not as a resource for pleasure, but as a tool for survival. He would not waste this opportunity on things he didn't need. Claire spent the morning in a state of distraction she couldn't quite name. She canceled her regular Saturday brunch, telling Madison she wasn't feeling well, which was technically true. Something had unsettled in her since seeing that hospital payment. Some foundation she had built her worldview upon had developed a crack she couldn't stop examining. She found herself searching for more information. Daniel Brooks, Boston area. There were several, but she narrowed the results using what she remembered from the gala. His neighborhood, Dorchester, based on the address associated with the hospital billing. His approximate age. Eventually, she found an old LinkedIn profile, dormant for years. Daniel Brooks, former construction foreman, experienced in residential and commercial building projects. The profile ended abruptly 5 years ago, around the time his employment history stopped updating. What happened 5 years ago? Claire wondered. What derailed a working professional with a LinkedIn profile into someone who couldn't afford a $100 charity donation? She could guess. Medical bills, a child's illness. The relentless mathematics of American healthcare costs versus working-class income. She had heard about these situations in the abstract. Statistics, quoted by politicians, she largely ignored, but she had never connected them to an actual face. An actual man standing humiliated at a registration table while she watched with amusement. Another notification appeared on her phone. A second transaction. This time, it was a payment to a property management company in Dorchester. The exact amount of 3 months back rent plus late fees. Daniel was using her card to catch up on housing debt, to prevent eviction, to keep a roof over his daughter's head. Claire set down her phone and stared out the window at the Charles River, glittering in the morning sun. She had expected to feel vindicated by now, superior in her predictions about how poor people wasted money. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar and deeply uncomfortable. She felt small. The third transaction appeared shortly after noon. Daniel had paid off an outstanding balance with the electric company, preventing a shutoff that had been scheduled for the following week. Then came a smaller payment to a pharmacy, clearly for prescriptions, exactly the copay amounts for what Claire guessed were cardiac medications. She tracked each notification as it arrived, her earlier amusement curdling into something more complicated with every transaction. He wasn't buying luxuries. He wasn't treating himself. Every single dollar went toward necessities, toward keeping himself and his daughter alive and housed and healthy. The closest thing to a personal purchase was a modest amount at a grocery store, and even that was clearly just food. Daniel stood in the grocery aisle, looking at the small display of children's toys near the checkout. Lily loved stuffed animals, had a collection of them on her bed that she talked to when she thought he wasn't listening. There was a small purple elephant that he knew she would adore, priced at $12. $12. Nothing. Less than Claire probably spent on a single cup of coffee. But it wasn't his money. It wasn't even really money at all in the sense he understood it, the sense of something earned through labor and sacrifice. It was a joke, a game, a rich woman's whim. Using it for Lily's hospital bills felt justified because medical debt was a systemic cruelty, because no child should go without care due to cost. Using it for rent felt necessary because eviction would harm Lily more than his pride was worth. But a toy? A stuffed elephant because his daughter deserved something soft and purple and new? Daniel put the elephant back on the shelf. He paid for the groceries with the platinum card and left without looking back. Claire's phone rang at 3:47. She saw the number and recognized it as her bank's fraud department. Of course, the transactions were unusual enough to trigger their monitoring systems. A platinum cardholder suddenly paying off massive medical debt and back rent in low-income neighborhoods would naturally raise flags. Miss Whitman, this is David Chen from Account Security. We're seeing some unusual activity on your platinum card and wanted to verify these are authorized transactions. They're authorized, Claire said. I understand, but the pattern is quite atypical for your spending history. Large payments to a hospital, a property management company in Dorchester, various utilities. It appears someone may be using your card for bill payments rather than purchases. Are you certain this isn't fraud? Claire almost laughed. The bank was confused because the transactions didn't match their algorithms for either legitimate spending or typical fraud. Daniel wasn't behaving like a thief or like a consumer. He was behaving like someone desperately trying to keep his family alive. I gave the card to someone, she explained. Voluntarily. It's a complicated situation. There was a pause. You gave your platinum card to someone else to use? 24 hours. As a sort of experiment. Another pause, longer this time. Claire could hear the judgment in the silence. I see. Well, the transactions are authorized then, but I should mention that the spending has exceeded your typical monthly amount by a significant margin. Would you like me to place a limit or flag further purchases? No, Claire said. Let it continue. After she hung up, she found herself dialing another number, one she had obtained through means she preferred not to examine too closely. Hospital billing departments kept records. Records contained contact information. It had taken a few calls and some creative explanations, but she had Daniel's phone number. He answered on the third ring. Hello? This is Claire Whitman, from the gala last night. Silence. Then, I know who you are. The bank called. They flagged the transactions as unusual. I can explain what I've spent, Daniel said, his voice neither apologetic nor defensive. I have receipts for everything. Hospital, rent, utilities, prescriptions, groceries. I can document every dollar. That's not why I'm calling. Then why? Claire found she didn't have a ready answer. Why was she calling? To confirm her assumptions had been wrong? To assuage the discomfort that had been growing all day? To understand something about this man who had confounded her expectations so thoroughly. I expected you to spend it differently, she finally admitted. I know what you expected. Still, no anger in his voice, just a flat acknowledgement. You expected me to buy something stupid, something you could point to as proof that people like me can't handle money. That's not, but it was exactly what she had expected. She couldn't even finish the lie. I used it where it was needed, Daniel continued. For my daughter. For keeping us housed and fed and alive. That's what money is for. From where I stand, I don't know what it's for from where you stand, but that's not my problem. He didn't say it with accusation. He said it like a fact, like describing the weather or the color of the sky. Claire found his lack of resentment almost more damaging than anger would have been. He had already assessed her, found her worldview lacking, and moved on without needing her to change. How much time do I have left? He asked. Claire checked her watch. About 16 hours. Then I have work to do. He hung up without saying goodbye. Claire couldn't stop thinking about the phone call. She replayed Daniel's words through the evening, each sentence landing differently as she examined it from new angles. That's what money is for. From where I stand, such a simple statement, yet it had unsettled something fundamental in her understanding. She had never thought about what money was for. She spent it on comfort, on convenience, on the social currency of appearing wealthy among the wealthy. Her apartment existed because she could afford it, not because she needed the space. Her wardrobe rotated seasonally because fashion demanded it, not because her clothes wore out. She attended galas and fundraisers as performance, contributing to causes she never researched because the donations were tax-deductible and the social connections were valuable. Daniel Brooks used money to prevent his daughter from being denied medical care. He used money to keep a roof over their heads. He used money for food and prescriptions and electricity. These were not choices in the way Claire's spending was choices. These were the bare necessities of survival, made impossible by circumstances he likely hadn't chosen. What had happened to his wife? The hospital bills suggested a sick child, but that didn't explain why Daniel was alone. Had she left when things got hard? Died? Claire found herself constructing narratives, trying to understand the life that had led to that moment at the gala when a man in a borrowed suit was turned away for lacking $100. She decided she needed to see for herself. The drive to Dorchester took 40 minutes in Saturday evening traffic. Claire had never spent much time in this neighborhood, had passed through perhaps on the way to somewhere else but never stopped to look. The streets were narrower than she expected, the buildings older. She parked her Mercedes a block from Daniel's address, conscious of how the car stood out among the aging sedans and practical vehicles that lined the street. His building was a 3-story walk-up, the kind of structure that had probably been modest, middle-class housing 60 years ago and had declined steadily since. The front steps needed repair. A handwritten sign on the door announced that the elevator was out of service, though Claire suspected it had been out of service for months, if not years. She didn't go in. She wasn't sure what she would say if confronted, wasn't even certain what she was doing here. Instead, she walked along the sidewalk, observing. A bodega on the corner with bars on the windows. A laundromat that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Children playing on a small patch of concrete that served as a playground, their shouts carrying through the cool evening air. Then she saw them. Daniel emerged from the building's front door, holding his daughter's hand. The girl was small for what Claire guessed was her age, with dark hair like her father's and a careful way of moving that suggested she had been taught to be cautious with her body. They walked slowly, accommodating her pace, Daniel's attention entirely focused on whatever she was telling him. At the corner, they stopped. The girl pointed at something in the bodega window, a display Claire couldn't see from her distance. Daniel knelt down to her level, speaking quietly. The girl nodded, seeming to accept whatever he said, and they continued walking without entering the store. Claire watched them disappear around the corner. A father and daughter, poor and managing, connected in the uncomplicated way of people who had only each other. There was no drama in the scene, no moment of crisis, just ordinary life, ordinary love, ordinary struggle. She drove home in silence, the Mercedes luxury feeling obscene in a way it never had before. Daniel returned the credit card the following morning, exactly 24 hours after he had received it. He came to Claire's building at the time he calculated the doorman would be changing shifts, hoping to slip in without being stopped. But Claire had left instructions, and he was directed to the elevator with surprising courtesy. Her apartment was everything he had expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows with river views. Furniture that cost more than his annual income. Art on the walls that probably represented someone's entire college tuition. He stood just inside the doorway, unwilling to track his worn shoes across the pristine floors. Here. He extended the card along with a folder. Everything's documented. Every transaction, every receipt. You can see exactly where it went. Claire took the folder but didn't open it. She was looking at him differently than she had at the gala, her earlier amusement replaced by something more uncertain. "How much is left?" she asked. "On the card?" I don't know. I didn't check the limit. On what I spent, here's the total. He had written the number on the outside of the folder. Hospital bill, rent, utilities, prescriptions, groceries, everything itemized, everything accounted for. The total was substantial but nowhere near what an unlimited credit card could have purchased. You didn't spend anything on yourself, Claire observed. I spent it on my family. That's the same thing. I meant, you didn't buy anything just because you wanted it. No luxuries, no treats, nothing frivolous. Daniel almost laughed. When was the last time you worried about whether your kid would have a place to sleep next month? When was the last time you chose between medication and groceries? Frivolous isn't something I have room for. He wasn't saying it to wound her. He was genuinely asking, trying to bridge the gap between their experiences. But the questions landed like accusations anyway, because they had no good answers. Thank you for what you did, Daniel added. You probably meant it as a joke, and I don't care. You gave me a chance to take care of my daughter, and I used it. He turned to leave. Wait. Claire's voice stopped him at the door. I want to know something. At the gala, when I offered you the card, what did you think? Daniel considered the question. I thought you were trying to humiliate me. I thought you wanted a story to tell your friends about the poor man who couldn't control himself around money. I thought about refusing. Why didn't you? Because my daughter needed heart surgery follow-up that I couldn't afford. Because we were about to be evicted. Because pride is a luxury too, and I don't have room for that either. He met her eyes directly. You wanted to prove something about people like me. I wanted to prove something too. What? That money isn't the measure of a person's worth. That how someone spends matters more than how much they have. That being poor doesn't mean being foolish or greedy or less than human. He paused. I think I proved my point better than you proved yours. He left without waiting for a response. The folder sat on Claire's coffee table for 3 days before she opened it. She wasn't sure why she delayed. Perhaps she was afraid of what the documentation would confirm, the meticulous accounting of a man who weighed every dollar against his daughter's survival. Perhaps she was simply avoiding the reckoning she knew was coming. When she finally looked, the contents were exactly what Daniel had described. A payment summary from Boston Children's Hospital, showing the massive cardiac care balance now reduced to 0. A receipt from the property management company, confirming 3 months of back rent plus fees. Utility statements showing accounts brought current. Pharmacy records for pediatric cardiac medications. A grocery receipt for eggs, bread, milk, vegetables, and modest amounts of chicken. Nothing extravagant, nothing wasteful. At the bottom of the folder, Daniel had included something unexpected. A photograph of his daughter, printed on regular paper from a home printer. On the back, he had written, "Her name is Lily. She's 8. Her mother died during her second heart surgery. Thank you for helping keep her father out of medical debt long enough to watch her grow up." Claire stared at the words until they blurred. Lily's mother had died during heart surgery. The same surgery that created the debt Daniel couldn't pay. He had lost his wife trying to save their daughter, then spent years drowning in the bills while raising a sick child alone. And Claire had handed him her credit card as a joke. She had laughed with her friends about what frivolous things the poor man would waste money on. She had expected to feel superior, vindicated in her assumptions about poverty and character. Instead, she felt the specific shame of someone who had been fundamentally wrong about something important. The joke she had made at Daniel's expense was not funny. It had never been funny. She had risked a child's welfare for entertainment, and only Daniel's discipline had prevented disaster. What if he had been the person she expected? What if he had maxed her card on luxuries? She would have canceled it, pressed charges perhaps, confirmed every bias she held, and Lily would still be facing medical debt and eviction, still one crisis away from catastrophe. The laugh she had shared with her friends at the gala echoed in her memory, distorted now into something ugly. She heard her own voice describing Daniel's face, speculating about casinos and bad choices. She saw the way her friends had nodded, comfortable in their shared assumptions. She had been cruel, not violently, not intentionally, but in the careless way of people who have never needed to consider the weight of their words. She had treated a desperate father as entertainment and called it generosity. Claire understood now that money alone could not fix what she had broken. She could write checks all day and never address the fundamental failure of her own perception. Daniel didn't need her charity. He needed to be seen as what he actually was, a father who had sacrificed everything for his daughter, who had been offered unlimited resources and spent them on necessities, who had more financial discipline under pressure than Claire had ever needed to develop. She began to formulate a different approach. It took 2 weeks for Claire to arrange the meeting. She worked through intermediaries at first, not wanting to pressure Daniel into contact he might not want. She asked the hospital's billing department to pass along her information, then waited. When he finally called, his voice carried the wariness of someone expecting another humiliation. "I'm not interested in being your redemption project," he said before she could speak. "That's not what this is." "Then what?" Claire had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, but the words felt inadequate now. "I made a mistake at the gala, not giving you the card. That turned out fine. But my reasons for doing it, the assumptions I made, the joke I thought I was telling, I know all that. You don't need to explain it to me. I'm explaining it to myself." She took a breath. "I spent my whole life thinking money was the only thing that separated me from people in your situation, that I was different because I had resources, smarter somehow, more deserving. Watching you spend those 24 hours taught me how wrong I was." Silence on the line. Then, and I want to offer you something. Not charity. A job. She explained the position she had created at her family's real estate development company. Not construction work, though that was part of it. A consulting role, leveraging his experience as a foreman to identify projects that could provide affordable housing, rehabilitation work for neglected buildings, partnerships with organizations serving families in situations like his. "The salary is fair market rate for someone with your experience," she said. "Benefits include comprehensive health coverage for you and your daughter, and there's flexibility built in for medical appointments, school events, whatever you need as a single parent." Another silence, longer this time. "Why?" "Because you were right. How someone uses money matters more than how much they have. I want to use mine better, and I want someone around who will tell me when I'm getting it wrong." Daniel didn't accept immediately. He asked questions, practical ones about job security and expectations and what would happen when Claire inevitably moved on to some other interest. She answered honestly, acknowledging that she couldn't guarantee anything beyond her current intentions. "I don't trust you," he said finally. "I probably never will completely. You made me entertainment for your friends, I know, but Lily needs stability more than I need to protect my pride. If this job is real, if the benefits are what you say, then I'll try it for 6 months. After that, we evaluate. That's fair." The call ended without warmth, without the resolution Claire might have hoped for. Daniel remained guarded, and she understood why. Trust, once damaged, rebuilt slowly, if at all. She had no right to expect forgiveness, but as she hung up, Claire felt something shift in her understanding of what the next years might hold. Not a redemption arc, not a heartwarming transformation. Something quieter. The slow, difficult work of proving through actions what words could never establish. She thought about Lily. The photograph still sitting on her coffee table. An 8-year-old girl who had lost her mother and nearly lost everything else, saved not by Claire's generosity but by her father's discipline. Claire had contributed money, yes, but the money would have meant nothing without Daniel's choices about how to use it. The joke she had made at the gala would never be funny. But perhaps it could become something else. A reminder of who she had been and who she was trying to become. A weight she carried forward into a life measured differently now, not by what she could afford to spend, by what she chose to do